So this is going to run for about an hour, and I'm going to start off with one question, and then we'll open it up to you guys, whatever you want to know. So this is Steve Almond, as you probably deduced.
All right. If that's all it takes to get applause, I am set for the day. All right.
All right, so Steve, I feel like the university setting provides a lot of support for young writers, and that you have deadlines, you have a built-in community, you have mentorship, all these great things. So what would your suggestions be for students who wish to continue with the writerly life once they leave the nest and fly out into the world?
Not really, but maybe. Yeah, so, I didn't go to grad school until I was almost 30, and so I'd worked for 6 or 7 years, and I think that's probably not a bad idea because you get a pretty clear sense of the way the culture works, and the culture kind of works on a spectrum, and the spectrum is, if you want to sell shit, great. You are right in the mainstream of American culture and what we do and what makes us the world leader in selling shit. And if you want to do work that is about your internal life, you are sort of at the other end of the spectrum. And what I've had to figure out is that the best thing you can possibly do is uncouple artistic creation from financial expectation. It is not a great idea to move into the world suffering under the delusion that the deepest, most personal work you want to do is going to lead to riches. It could. I hope it does for everybody in this room. But it's probably not going to. And it certainly hasn't for me. Not because the world's a horrible place, but because it's quite difficult for people to experience their own internal lives. And if your art is any good, that's what you're asking people to do. And that's a complicated and inconvenient activity. And this is a culture that's very predicated on convenience and a certain kind of eliding of the difficult, painful stuff that we feel but try not to feel. That's what all your fucking devices are for. So, I don't mean that the devices are fucking, you know what I mean. So that being the case, what I've tried to do is, and what I urge people to do who are in their apprenticeship phase as writers, is to try to do a real self-inventory. You could ask me, well, Almond, how is it that you continue to write to whatever extent you do? And I could give you my answer, but that's my stuff, my age, gender, whatever background I came with, whatever native talents I have, and it won't match up with yours, and whatever needs I have. So when I say do a self-inventory, I mean you're suddenly, when you leave school, going to be your own boss, and nobody is going to be asking you to write anything. In fact, there are going to be a lot of forces, including your own internal resistance, that want you to do anything but write. So you have to be your own boss, and you have to figure out how to make writing a sustainable part of your life, and that means you're going to have to seek patrons. You're going to have to seek people who will pay you so that you can get time at the keyboard. And you're going to have to figure out when you do the best work, what time of day, in what mood, listening to what music, under the influence of what sort of drugs, caffeine, or whatever else. And that's what you should do. If you write best in the morning, and you write best when you're, in a coffee shop, then you have to figure out how to design your life so that you have 4 or 5 mornings a week that you have those hours to write. Nobody else is going to do that for you. That's your job now. You're the boss. And if you don't do this self-inventory, you are going to push writing to the edge of your life, because the rest of it is going to be filled with things that are easier to do, frankly, and less doubt-choked, and in which the reward is more immediate and obvious to you, and less dangerous emotionally and psychologically. So that means you really do have to do a self-inventory. How important is material stuff? And don't lie to yourself about it. If you don't want to drive a beater, you want to drive a nice car, you have to admit to yourself, well, I want to drive a nice car. Maybe I need to clean up my act a little bit and work in this corporate setting rather than in this coffee shop. But whatever it is, you have to build in the time that allows you to make writing a sustainable part of your life. You're not interrupting at all. What's that?
Is this the informational session?
No.
This is a class? This is a class. Oh, no.
Seems like a class. I think it's a class. I'm going. So, anyway, so that is. I know that's not like I don't have any trade secret for you. I wish I did, but it's very important that you're able to look at your own lives and what responsibilities you have, financial, emotional, and otherwise. Some of you hopefully will want to have family. Some of you will be financially responsible for, family, and that's something else to consider as well. As much as you can, you need to build in some kind of routine or some habit of making sure that you've created space in your life. And it might not be initially right out of school 40 hours. I mean, it's not going to be at the center of your life necessarily, and then that means that it has to be a smaller but essential part of it while you're also trying to figure out how to support yourself without the training wheels, which is what a good MFA or PhD program is. It's a welfare state for artists. Thank fucking God. Welfare states for corporations. You might as well have them for artists. But it is temporary, as you know. And I would be thinking about that stuff and trying to really get organized about it. So I'm happy to sit in a kind of stunned silence for 50 minutes. And Heather can certainly continue to ask me questions. But you guys know what you want to know. So loose the hounds if you have questions. I mean, ask questions if you have questions. I believe that was a metaphor. Yep.
You said find the times of day that you are most likely to produce your best work. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your routine and what that means for you as a writer. Not saying that we're all going to emulate it, because I know you said it has to be an individual thing, but...
Yeah, I mean, you certainly could. I remember a writer early on, I went to a conference, and he said, well, I write 4 hours in order to reach the deep, dark place from which I create my fucking awesome art. And I was like, right, okay, there's 4 hours to reach the deep, dark place, fucking awesome art. And, that was his prescription, and I tried, but, that actually didn't really work for me. It was useful, I guess, in that I was trying to set aside that time. I tend to write the best in the morning. I'm just freshest, I think, at night is when we tell ourselves stories, right? Not our conscious mind, but our artistic unconscious generates stories at night, dreams, which we need to survive or we'll go crazy. And I feel like for whatever reason, whatever's happening there, I have a little bit more access to the artistic unconscious in the morning. Also, I just feel super guilty all the time as a result maybe of being a Jewish person or just being a schmuck or whatever it is, but I feel guilty all the time. And so I find that it alleviates some of my guilt if I try to work in the morning. And also, it's sort of like the day and all the crap that is there to clutter up your mind is a little bit less there in the morning. If I don't get to the keyboard and start working on the more serious stuff that I'm trying to get done, if I don't want to feel guilty about myself and how hard I'm trying to make art, if I don't get to that, then it all gets filled with spam and email and a bunch of other smaller things that don't allow me to pay as careful attention as I need to my crazy little characters. Right? That's all pretty fragile stuff in my view. So. Way back there in a tie.
I watched an interview with a very successful writer, or screenplay writer, and he said that when he writes, he'll come up with an idea one day, he'll make a note of it, and then put it away, and he'll open it up the next day, write it, but he'll stop there. He doesn't write anything other than what he thought of the day before. Do you recommend that, or you say when you're in the zone, go for it?
Well, he sounds like he was very successful. Works for him. I mean, look, this is like saying, what medicine do you think will cure my existential illness? I don't know. It works for him. It's worth a try. But, trying to write fiction, nonfiction poetry is just a weird, inimitable thing. It's not like I don't find that it adheres to a formula. And that's why I recommend doing an inventory. Did you write the best thing you ever wrote? Think about the best thing you ever wrote. Just in your own view, the thing that you thought was the most true. Because when we say something's working or we liked it or it's beautiful, what we're really fucking saying at the bottom of it is it was the most true. So think about the truest thing you've written, not the most sentimental, I mean real emotion, the truest thing, the thing that got the best response, that you know is the best you've been able to do. And just think about what the circumstances were when you wrote that. I hope you weren't fresh off of a breakup and like that's what brought you to that point. But if there was a certain melancholy that helped you get to that place, then maybe that's where you have to go back to. If it was in the morning or if it was late at night, maybe your circadian rhythm just works in such a way that you just do best at night when everyone else is sleeping. And I don't know, if people have coffee and they need that, or, peyote, whatever it is. Actually, scratch that. Don't do peyote. Steve Almond said to do it. I'm going to show up at the emergency room. He said it. He said it. He's not successful, but he said it. So, think about that really. And I didn't make that up. Amy Bender made that up, and she said that at a conference, and I was like, that sounds too easy. That sounds very obvious. And then sure enough, she's goddamn right. I thought about, what were the circumstances under which I've done the best work, and just try to replicate those. Basically anything that will get you to the keyboard. For me, that's very clearly been writing about stuff that I can't get rid of by other means. That's the bottom line. I don't know what else you would be doing at the keyboard. Yep.
I was wondering how you felt about, the Academy's institutionalization of the short story form. Do you think the workshop model is good for writers?
The only thing I can say, I don't know, yes, no, there's great writers who got MFAs, there's great writers who had nothing to do with an MFA program. Yes, there's a certain tendency to, in a workshop setting, there's a fair amount, you could say that maybe they're sanding the interesting edges off of pieces. I don't know. I teach workshops, and I feel like the job of a workshop is to look at a piece and tell the writer, here's what I think you were trying to do, and here are the places in the piece where you're doing it the best, and here are the places where you're falling down on the job and not honoring what you set out to do. And maybe more broadly, are you really going to write a short story that's a slice of life, that doesn't have real danger and trouble in it, that isn't at some level trying to break the reader's heart or mend it? Because if you are, why? Get a webcam. Fiction is fiction now, novels and short stories and novellas. The great asset to that form is that you are designing a world for maximum psychological, emotional, and moral impact. The other thing that I see in workshop that I think is something that a workshop often requires in order to force writers in their apprenticeship phase to see it, is that most writing fails not because of a lack of imagination, not because people's talent with the language isn't terrific. Most writing fails out of insecurity, because writers feel that they're, especially in this era, competing with TV and movies and video games and a bunch of frantic visual media, and they lose faith in traditional storytelling, and they leap into scenes and slam the reader with a bunch of vivid details out of insecurity, and forget that the pleasure of a goddamn story is that you're being told a story. Once upon a time, there should be a narrator who should guide us through every moment. 90% of the stories that fail in workshop that I rejected when I was editing a literary magazine of my own that suck shit are ones that are simply confusing. They're just simply confusing. They're confusing out of insecurity. The writer has lost faith in storytelling. Workshop, not workshop, writing it on a Tuesday, who cares? I mean, I don't mean to be just... There's plenty of great people writing great stories. Sometimes workshops help out, and sometimes maybe they cause people, for whatever reason, to retreat from the deepest work that they want to do. But that's the fault of the student, not the workshop, or the instructor for not making that workshop more rigorous. And I don't mean critical, I mean rigorous. You're in charge of your own educational experience. You can't blame it on the workshop if your work isn't reaching as deep as it needs to reach. Although you could say, I wish the workshop helped me more sometimes. Yep.
I was wondering, in hindsight, when looking at your work, do you personally find that you think it's better when you're writing like on your own, like from your own ideas and own prompt, or like in college where you're given a prompt, that you have to follow, and consequently, do you find it's better when you write for the audience or for yourself?
Yeah. Well, those are two interesting questions. So the truth is, I've written some very interesting things when I was given a prompt, rather than just dream it up because I'm so imaginative. And the truth is that that's partly because the reason I tend to do a lot of free writes in class is because part of what crushes interesting writing, a lot of it, is self-consciousness. You say, oh, God, I'm wearing my writer hat, my serious young writer hat. And your actual personality goes out the window. The fact that you have a sense of humor, that there are parts of you that are angry and fucked up and out of control, all of which actually should go straight into your work. So I actually think that sometimes prompts are helpful because you're not under the burden of, this is my creation, I have plucked from the Empyrean heights this idea. Sometimes people have given me prompts and it kind of frees me up in a way. In the same way that doing a free write rather than sitting there going, I've got an unlimited amount of time to screw this up. The other question is a good one as well. My own experience has been that when I really am writing well, I'm just not doing a lot of self-auditing of what I'm doing. And part of the reason for that is because what you're trying to get out of workshop more than making your own work get better is the development of a critical faculty. And a critical faculty is the thing that allows you to make judgments about your own writing and where it's falling short without questioning your own talent. Writers are always on the knife's edge of two sort of forms of excess. The first is this sort of narcissistic belief that you're wonderful and creative and you have a story to tell. You're the Messiah. It's come from on high and you are the vessel through which the story will go to. And you have to believe that to some extent. Otherwise you wouldn't be in that room. You have to believe that you have important things to say. But if that is too much in ascendance, you produce work that's kind of self-indulgent. You leave the reader behind. You're not really paying attention to what the reader wants. You're paying attention to what you want, right? The other side of that, though, is if you're too critical of your own work, you'll go into writer's block. That's what writer's block is, where you're too plagued by doubt to keep making those decisions you need to. So when I'm writing well, I'm not thinking about myself or pleasing myself. I'm not thinking about pleasing some reader. I'm thinking about my characters, and I'm thinking about what kind of struggle they're in, and I'm thinking about how I push them further and further into danger. That's who I'm thinking about if things are going well. I'm thinking about my characters and what they're up against and how I can make it just a little bit harder for them to see what they're made of. But I do feel that part of being a good writer is recognizing that if the reader is confused, that's the worst, that's the greatest sin you can commit as a writer, is to confuse the reader. It sounds totally dull, but the Hippocratic oath of writing is never confuse the reader. Because a confused reader isn't doing the work that you want them to do. They're not engaging with the productive forms of bewilderment about which or from which art arises. There are lots of productive forms of bewilderment. Why do we screw up the relationships that mean the most to us? Why can't we get over the loss of people? Why do we push people away who we want to be? Why can't we get what we want in life? Why weren't our parents better to us? Why weren't we better to them? Blah, blah, on and on. Those are the questions that are genuinely bewildering and which art is intended to engage and start to try to resolve, or at least allow us to experience. But there are all these unproductive forms of bewilderment, like, where is my character? Who's talking to me? Who's in the room with them? What the fuck is at stake in this scene? Those are unproductive forms of bewilderment, and they're kind of a fuck you to the reader, right? They're like, hey, my shit's so important, I don't have to tell you that. So it's a little bit of both. I'm thinking about the reader in a general way, saying, how can I guide them through this story? How can I make sure they're never confused? But at the end of the day, I'm trying to think as much as I can about the characters and whatever they're going through, if things are going well. Yep.
You talked about writer's block being self-doubt. Can you talk a little bit about how you've gotten out of that in the past?
Sure. So I went to grad school, had a pretty bad time. I was an asshole. They were assholes. Everybody was an asshole. And sometimes that's how it is. You know, there's some phases of your life that you look back on and you're like, oh yeah, I was an asshole. I couldn't help it, but I was, and they were too, and so it all blew up. But I was learning some things, and it took me about another 6 or 7 years to start writing stories that were any good. And that's a long time when you're sitting there alone in your underwear, you know, with music and masturbation as your other sources of activity, and like no human contact. It was awful. But after enough of that, I was able to publish a book of short stories with a little press, and that was great. And I thought, I published a book. This is the thing. I wanted to do it at 30. Then I thought, well, I'll do it at 32. Fine. 35, that's fine. It always takes longer than you think it's gonna. It always does. I mean, usually it does. And so I thought, well, this is it, man. Now the money's going to start rolling in. I'm going to get a lot of cocaine. This is going to be awesome. And it was not awesome. It was really exciting for a little while, and then it was a collection of short stories. It had its little life, and then its life was over, and I had to go back and figure out what I was going to do. I worked on a novel, really long, really terrible novel, 850 pages of terrible. I was, ouch is right. And a year and a half of work. Bad work, not honest, engaged work, you know, really, I don't know, I didn't know the guy. But I was so loyal and faithful, I said, gotta finish the novel. Everybody's waiting for the novel. And it was terrible, and I had an agent at that time. I haven't for a while, but I had an agent at that time, and it took me like 18 months to write this book, and it took her like 18 seconds to be like, this book is terrible, and I don't want to work with you. Which was the right response. She was making a very good business decision. She was right. It was a terrible book. But the point is, I was crushed. I mean, I knew it was bad when I was writing, but you still hope, right? And so then I fell into a depression. I fell into a pretty serious depression. I had no backup plan at all. And so that was not a lot of fun. But the interesting thing is that I was carrying around, I think, at that time, a lot of I kind of had this sense of literary pride. Like, okay, I'm this guy who's at the start of my career, and now that's why I thought I had to write that novel. Not because I really wanted to do it, because that's what the world expected, my readers, all 6 of them. And so what happened when I fell into this depression is that I started not being able to get out of bed. And then the only thing that would get me out of bed was if there was like some good chocolate in my house, which there usually was as a result of the depression. And the point is that what happened is I really got stripped of my literary vanity by that experience. And I thought, at a very fundamental, basic level, what will get me to the keyboard? What's going to do it? What is going to get my sorry fucking failure ass to sit at the keyboard and work on something? And the only answer was, if you write about something that you really care about a lot, like, for instance, candy, which is something I would have never considered. It's beneath my dignity. I'm writing about the eternal verities. But really, that's what it took, was for me to say, fuck that. You're such a mess right now, Almond. You're not going to get to the keyboard with all that pressure. You need to set the bar a lot lower. Set the bar right at your own depravity. That low. And the first book was about sex. So I went and I visited a candy factory. And I was like, done. All I want to do is spend time in this environment. And because I'd done journalism previously, I basically sent a letter or email to people saying, candy companies saying, I'm writing a book about candy. I wasn't writing a book about candy. I really just wanted to be in more factories. And all throughout that experience, like the moment I got into a candy factory, I was happy. And it might have had to do with the fact that I was also packing my pie hole with candy. But it was a very odd and manic experience because I would be in these factories and super into it, and it was just everything, the smells, the taste, the people I was talking to were all obsessed with candy, and I was in hog heaven. And then I would go back to the hotel or go back to my apartment and just be terribly depressed. So the book that ended up getting written, which by the way, I put in a drawer and just disregarded because I thought it was a piece of crap, until friends of mine were like, haven't you been flying around to Boise, Idaho, and Kansas City and Sioux City, Iowa, visiting candy factories? Weren't you working on some book about that? And they were the ones who actually caused me to get the manuscript out and show it to them. And they were the ones who said, it's not great, but there's some very interesting stuff here. You have to keep working on it. And parenthetically, that's another reason that I think it's important to be in an academic setting, is you are finding the people who are going to keep you honest in this room. The people who are going to make sure that you are getting to the keyboard and pursuing the work that is the most interesting and important. Those people are really important, because I couldn't see it at all. I was ready to just push that whole experiment to the side and return to masturbation land. So what ended up happening was I reworked that, and it found its way into the world. And in fact, it was a book about candy, but it was really a book about depression. It was a book about the things that we need to find a path from despair. For me, it's candy. For other people, it's other things. But it was a pretty deep book, at least by my reckoning. It was not a superficial piece of work. It was more humorous and antic than a lot of my fiction had been, because I'd relaxed and I felt like, I'm just writing this book about candy. I don't have to be such a serious young writer about it. And so more of my personality actually made it onto the page. If you are feeling crushed by doubt, and that is a natural and actually inevitable part of the whole process, set the bar lower. Set the bar lower. Set the bar low enough that you can get to the keyboard. Do what you can. Forgive yourself the rest. Yep.
I have this feeling like everything I write can always be improved and always be better.
Yep.
I was just so it just makes it hard whenever you have a deadline that you have to get something done. How do you go about just working through that feeling and getting something finished so that later you can go back and revise it, and then how do you go back and revise it?
It's like if I had a really quick response to that, I would just make it a book and sell it. That's a complicated, you're asking complicated questions. You can, oftentimes I find myself messing with language over and over and over again. And I will tell you that most of the time when I'm doing that, and I suspect a lot of the time when you're doing that, what you're doing is messing with language to try to solve a story problem. The reason you perseverate or return obsessively to a particular piece of language or go over and over again is because you don't really have a firm grasp of the story. Because you shouldn't, when things are going well and the plot is well designed and you know how the character is going to be pushed into danger, the language is really just the vehicle on that trip. You're not constantly leaning over the engine saying, well, what? And tinkering with things. Probably the engine is a little bit broken if you're obsessing about language. You're trying to solve a story problem by messing with language. So that kind of constant tinkering with language to me is symptomatic. I'm doing it right now with a novel. I have no idea where it's going, and so I'm just messing with the sentences, trying to make them better and better and better. So that's one problem that people run into. The question of whether you ever finish a story and it's perfect, I've got some bad news and good news for you. Which would you like first? The bad news is you're never going to have that feeling. If you're any good, you're going to continue to see that there are extra words you didn't need, a better way of putting it, a stronger verb that would obviate the need for a lazy adverb, a lazy verb dressed up with an adverb. That's a metaphor that wasn't necessary, where you could have stopped on a strong verb. that's never going to stop. If you're any good, you're going to continue to get stronger and stronger, and that means you'll look at your work, even if it's published in a book, and say, I didn't need those words. I could have put that better. I didn't stick that point well enough. That detail feels a little bit worn. I could have been a little bit more honest in that moment. That's not going to go away. The good news is that you still can get your work published. And you shouldn't allow the perfect to be an enemy of the really good. I find that when I've finished a story, the most important thing, like to me, it's a treat to revise. That's the place where you go get rid of all the B-plus material. The reason that the stories that you guys read in class, the stories by published writers, or the writers that you really admire, the reason their work reads so quickly is because they've gotten rid of all the unnecessary words. They've gotten rid of every single bit of language that isn't A-plus language. That's why they're published. And the development of this critical faculty is the thing that I think allows you to do that without getting down on your work. I took a story that was 15,000 words, and there were a lot of scenes that were really interesting and so forth. It only really took the form it needed to after I'd gotten rid of 7,500 of those words. They were fine scenes, they were good, I spent a lot of time on them, but they weren't essential to the story. But even once you do that, I still look at that story and see words that are unnecessary. That's never going to stop. That just means you're getting better as a writer. It's very ironic and very unpleasant, but the better you get as a writer, the more you look at your old work and it doesn't measure up. That's good. That means you're making progress. That's the good news. If your stuff that you were writing 6 months ago or a year sucks, and you can see why it sucks, that means you're getting better as a writer. Okay. Yep.
Shortly after I saw the documentary Bad Writing, in class we read Larson's novel.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could discuss, because I don't know anybody else who's seen that documentary. Apparently it's not readily available.
Apparently not. Anybody seen Bad Writing? One other person. It's your soulmate. He's right behind you.
Could you discuss, for the benefit of this audience, could you discuss a little bit what you discussed in Bad Writing? So I found it really enlightening. And also maybe talk about writing Teddy Larson's
Bad novel.
Yeah.
All right, so just a little bit of background. So Bad Writing is just a documentary about bad writing. And in that documentary, I talk about my little weird DIY book, Bad Poetry, which is filled with really fucking shitty, bad, terrible poetry. If there's time at the end, we'll hear a bad poem. Tonight I'll read a bad poem. And the point of that book is to try to make a very simple point, which is you're all going to do some bad writing. We look at these writers we admire, and like I see a story by, I don't know, Zadie Smith, or by Sam Lipsyte, or by Dave Eggers, or Alice Munro, and I'm like, whoa, holy shit, they're so awesome. And what you don't see is all the shitty drafts, and all the stories and projects that didn't work. If you're ever wondering about this, go see the archives of your favorite writer. I went to see Kurt Vonnegut's archives. I think his novels to me, they got a little repetitive at a certain point. But his voice, what he's able to muster, his command of plot, and is just astonishing to me. But then you read his early short stories, and they suck. And they suck in exactly the way that my early short stories sucked. They were obedient. They were him trying to imitate Hemingway rather than being who he was. And so that's actually very encouraging to realize that. And so I hope Bad Poetry, which contains poems that I wrote when I was in my mid-30s, after I had an MFA and 2 books in the world. And you will be almost astonished at how fucking awful and narcissistic and just crazily racist and horrible these poems are. And that should be encouraging to you, because actually hiding behind every bad piece of writing you do is usually an experience that you just weren't ready to write about yet. That's okay. It's a natural, organic part of the process. The United States, in particular, under the aegis of late model capitalism, is this kind of false utopia of perfection and sort of youthful genius. It's a genius culture, except that nobody's really a genius. There are a few people who are geniuses, and most of them are profoundly unhappy. And the rest of us just have to work our asses off and hide the bad stuff. As for writing Teddy, so Lars's novel is really about that novel I was talking about, that 850-page novel that was so awful. That's Larson's novel. And I just snuck it into a short story. The plot of the story is a guy, a middle-aged guy with wife and kids, has a best friend who just announces out of the blue that he's written a novel, like a sci-fi epic. And he gives it to his friend to read and give him feedback. And the whole plot of the story is the main character avoiding reading Larson's novel. And why does he avoid reading Larson's novel? Deep down, why do you think he avoids reading the novel? You know the answer. Why do you think he avoids reading his friend's novel?
Because it might be good.
And what then? What if it's good?
Then he's a fraud.
He's jealous. He's a fraud. And he envies the fact that Larson has tried to do something creative. Whether or not it's successful or not, he tried. How many people can say that? So that's what he's really frightened of. And he reads the novel, and it is pretty ham-handed and awful and so forth. But within that awfulness and all the plaque of cliche and all the language, there's a real heart trying to do something, trying to tell his own story in whatever hackneyed way. And that is a blessed endeavor, to be trying to do that. So, and it was so much fun to write Larson's novel. I don't have it with me, otherwise I'd read some tonight. But it was so much fun to write those cliches. It's like sometimes I'll teach a workshop on writing sex scenes, and the first thing I ask people to do, I read them the worst piece of erotic fiction that I've ever encountered that I didn't write. And then I say, your job is to write something even worse than that. And this very interesting thing happens. People are so kind of anxious and pent up about writing sex scenes in general, I think, because we're all so kind of frightened and worked up about that stuff. But when you tell people to write a really terrible sex scene, they allow themselves to actually write this just filthy stuff. And they have the over-the-top cliches, but inevitably there's something really tender that happens and something emotionally dangerous that happens in those scenes. Just because I've told them, don't worry about writing good, I want you to write bad. It really frees them up. It frees them up from their own American, I've got to make it perfect, I've got to prove to the world that I'm a serious young writer bullshit. So, yeah.
You've kind of been answering this question the whole time, but next week I get the distinct pleasure of leading a class of undergraduates into writing their first short story ever. And I was wondering if you have any tips or tricks or advice or things you want to scream at them about.
The main thing I say when it comes to good writing is it's generally the byproduct of somebody telling the truth about the things that matter to them the most deeply. That's what good writing is. Sometimes it's in fictional disguise, sometimes it's memoir, sometimes it's this kind of compressed associative language that is in poetry. But it's always somebody writing about the things that matter to them the most deeply. And that's the main challenge, I think, when undergraduates are told, or I don't know, young people who haven't done a lot of creative writing are told, write a short story. What they think you're asking is write some beautiful language. Show me what a good writer you are and how much you love language. And that's not what you're asking them for. You're asking them to, tell them a story, literally, once upon a time. They get very caught up in how beautiful can I make it? How much can I prove to the teacher that I know what a metaphor is and I can do a good one? Or, in really good stories, I'm almost entirely uninterested in the language, or the language seems just subsumed in my being immersed in a world where I'm just worrying about those characters. I'm just absolutely petrified because I can tell they're actually really going through something. Not a student trying to make them go through something, they're going through something. But it's tough because if they really tell the truth, who at age 21 wants to do that, honestly? Who wants to really tell the truth about the things that matter? Who wants to do that at age 47? I still don't want to do it. It's sort of easier said than done. Hopefully you've given them the tools. Hopefully you've talked with them about plot, the mechanism by which your character is pushed up against his or her fears and desires. Hopefully you've done that. Talked about characterization, the idea that they can provide the reader direct characterization. They can just describe a character like Emma Woodhouse. Jane Austen just describes her just for the reader, just like that. She doesn't plunk her in a scene and expect us to try to figure out who Emma Woodhouse is. So I think that, a good teacher, it's like mise en place. You got to put a bunch of things in order. You got to give them the tools to build a good story, because it's not like you just write about what matters to you, man, and it produces a good story. There's stuff that they need to be thinking about. But at the bottom of it, I think you have to convince them that you actually want them to tell you the truth about something that matters to them. I see a lot of stories where people sort of audition plots. You'll see like 6, it's like, there's, divorce seems to be the first plot. Oh, and grandma's dead. Okay, that's the second plot. And, there's a romantic interest, plot number 3. And, but he's gay. Okay, plot number 4. So you see a lot of ways in which people tend to avoid going deep on a particular. So that's one thing you might recommend to them. Think about just one plot. You guys are at the beginning of your writing career. Just try going deep on one plot. Fiction's not a democracy. Don't give me 6 point of views. How about just one point of view? Right? I might, if it doesn't sound condescending, try to get them to avoid some of those obvious mistakes. Part of the reason that I wrote this, make these little DIY books, and this was called This Won't Take But a Minute, Honey. It's actually 2 kind of weirdo books. And the one half is short shorts, because nobody was ever going to publish any of my short shorts. And the other half is really just, my little, what I have to say about writing. It's 30 very short lectures. That's the sum of what I have to say about writing. And part of the reason is because I wish there had been such a book when I was starting to write, so that I could, at least in a very concrete way, identify some of the mistakes that I was going to make and start the process of making them less. Yep.
When you start a story, what do you feel is like the easiest place to start? Is it like characters? Is it fleshing out the plot? Or is it building the world? Or where exactly?
Well, those are all important. Everything you've said is important. And I'll just tell you that sometimes it's one of those 3. It's usually one of those 3 things. Let's see. The best way to say it is that a good story is usually the combination of a character who's pretty clearly defined, pushed into some kind of disequilibrium. And oftentimes, in order to understand who that character is, you have to understand what world they inhabit. And all of those things are necessary. And hopefully they're building on one another. There's a relationship there. It's important that the story is set in Uzbekistan, among the goat herders, because it's a story about... It's not a story about man-goat love, although it could be. It's not that story. But it's important because you get one opportunity in this part of the world to make it happen with somebody you love. You get one opportunity. There's not a lot of people. Population density is very low. And our hero has found a young woman from the other village, and the stakes are there. But there's trouble. The family doesn't like him. And there's nothing he can do because of who he is to prove to them that he's worthy of their daughter. But he's got to try. And the big goat herding festival is just next week. It's a combination of a well-defined character, a world that they inhabit, and some kind of disequilibrium. Maybe it's the possibility of some beautiful, wonderful thing happening. He meets the love of his life. He knows who it is. He has the chance to get her. Doesn't mean he will get her, but it does mean that the reader's going to stick around. Because the reader doesn't want your fancy fucking language. They really don't. They don't want to know how many vivid details you can accrete. I promise you. Let me save you some time. They want to know that you have a good story to tell and somebody's in trouble.
Do
Yep.
you find them moving away from using grand language in their writing? And if so, how do you think that's happening?
Well, so the way I would say it works with language is that when we speak about language kind of rising up and becoming grand, let's say it moves into the lyric register, it becomes more sort of psychologically and sensually dense, like the last paragraph of The Dead, right, by Joyce. We've all read that. Or, okay, he gets one of those. So, to his great relief, James Joyce earns the horns of heavy metal. Every story you read, there are those moments where we've been building up to it. Hopefully your stories are constructed as a kind of ramp, a psychologically and emotionally reliable ramp that you're building to the moments that really matter. And your job in those moments is what? Slow the fuck down. Slow down. When your character is feeling too much, is in an impossible situation, he's failed. He's done the best he could do as a goat herder, and it wasn't enough. And now the girl, he's seeing her for the last time before she goes and marries a far superior goat herder. Big goat herder muscles. It's not enough to allow her to just go. You got to slow down at the moments of maximum impact. You put a lot of time and energy building that world, finding that character, pushing that character into that exalted realm of possibility, and now it's slipping away from him. Slow down. But the interesting thing is when your characters are in an emotionally dangerous situation, the language, in an effort, an unconscious effort to capture the complexity of the moment that your character is in, rises up into that lyric register. And it doesn't feel grand. It doesn't feel like a pose. It's not put on to impress the reader. It is produced out of the writer in an effort to really try to get across what that character is suffering, which is in fact what the author has suffered herself on some level. So people are still writing, beautiful language, but it needs to be organic. It needs to arise from the characters and their crisis, not from the author's attempt to impress people. Language in the American tradition was very internal and psychologically complex, coming out of Henry James, right? Even Poe. And when Hemingway came along, he came along at the beginning of the time that we started watching movies and that visual media started to be the dominant form in this country, and then television came along. And Hemingway was all about the external. He was a cinematographer and a brilliant one. He said, I'm not going to talk about the characters' feelings and their emotional complexity. I'm going to talk about what they did and what the specific details of their external world were. And I'm going to trust the reader to divine the depths of the iceberg. I'm just going to give the top tenth of what I see and observe, and the reader is going to have to figure out what's going on internally. And that was sort of the dominant mode for a while. That's a lot of what Raymond Carver does, although I think in a lot more tender a way, for instance, than Hemingway. I think good writing actually, it's a false dichotomy that you're either writing a very interior kind of writing, psychologically sophisticated, or it's all pure just showing the reader and allowing them to figure it out. I think that whole show don't tell dichotomy is nonsense. It should be tell the reader what they need to know, tell the reader what's at stake, and then give them the scene. So that if they're not going to be able to feel what the character feels unless they know what the character knows. It's just basic math. And I don't feel like there is, I feel like there are a bunch of people writing these right now especially who are doing incredible work. Some of it is very restrained and beautiful, and the reader is given a lot of the responsibility of divining what's going on internally, and some of it is incredibly internal and sophisticated and anguished. And, George Saunders' story, those guys are all neurotic messes. And, you have instant access to the world of their minds and hearts as they're kind of reeling about one thing or another. So I don't feel like there's really any trend going on. People are writing beautiful stuff in whatever way is most organic to them. Okay. Yep.
What do you think of right now as your best, most true piece of writing, and how did you come to write it and to convince yourself to tell the truth?
Oh gosh.
One of your best.
Yeah. Well, so maybe I'll read a little bit tonight from a little bit of a story from God Bless America, which is a story called Donkey Greedy, Donkey Gets Punched. It says, and I can just tell you that story is the result of having a really good idea for a story. What happens when you have a psychoanalyst who's like a closet poker player? When people have secrets, they're already in trouble because there's a possibility that they're going to be found out. And what made that story rewarding to write, whether it's a great story or not, what made it really rewarding to write is that I had all three of those elements. I had the world that this guy inhabited, I had a clearly defined character, and had a way of pushing him into danger. When you know who your character is, you know what causes them danger. So this guy was hiding a poker habit, as is half of America, it seems to me. So what do? Well, in the first couple of pages of this story, his wife catches him in a lie and knows that he's playing poker. So that's going nowhere. So then what do? Well, he quits playing poker. He turns away from it. And what has to happen next? Who has to walk into his office? Who has to walk into his office? A poker player. How about the best poker player on earth? How about the best poker player on earth with serious daddy issues that almost exactly mirror his daddy issues? And then what has to happen after this poker player quits the therapy because it's too intense and he can't handle it and he's furious at his therapist? What has to happen at the end of the story?
They play cards.
They have to play cards, man. They have to get it across the table. I don't mean to oversimplify it. It's not a schematic. But with that story anyway, it was quite clear what had to happen in order to push this character into maximum danger. And that was very gratifying, regardless of whether, there's lots of things. What I'm most excited about are my little freaky books that I make myself. Because that's just my own crazy. I'm not even worrying about, that's the stuff that's the most personal to me. So probably, and I'll read from these tonight.
Okay, we probably have time for, I think, one, maybe two more questions.
Okay.
When it comes to characters and actually actions, but also more of characters, do you prefer kind of letting your characters spell out for themselves, like a character intuition, or do you kind of like to deliberate them, like puppet them? Either way, like, do you find pros and cons of each one? Which one do you kind of prefer?
I don't understand what you mean by puppet them.
Well, it's like, do you want to deliberate each action, or do you just want to let them go for themselves? Like this, like stay true to the character. Like this character is, because one time I was writing a character, I was gonna kill them off, but then I was like, I can't do this for some reason. That's just not true to the character. So I actually just, and it was out of it seemed like I was out of my control.
Yeah.
Or do you like to say, no, you're gonna die, so I'm gonna make you die. So,
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So it's probably good that they didn't die. Because it sounds like intuitively you had a sense of like they're not supposed to die yet. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually a good thing when you have your artistic unconscious is a lot more powerful than your conscious mind. It's the most powerful ally you've got, and it's kind of the most tricky and elusive one. So if you find that somebody else is steering, that's cool. That's fine. That's good you didn't kill off that character. That meant that character was important to you and had more time on stage to do some. What I will say is that it's kind of a combination of those two. You need to recognize who the characters are who are important to you. You're going to take them on a journey, but you have to be in control of it. Because I oftentimes find that if you're not pressing them into danger, they're not going to get into any danger. If I had to count the number of stories that I have had to read as a teacher or a manuscript consultant that are basically feckless, because there's a passive character who's resistant to any kind of change. I'll just read you chapter and verse here. Character in a whole, this is called. Just a little. This kind of character drives me crazy. But perhaps you are one of those aspiring writers who wishes to write about the alienated, that exalted breed who are so deeply and mysteriously wounded that they are no longer able to feel much of anything and must therefore stumble through their given plot points, secretly hoping they are being filmed for an emo video. The alienated are all the same. They're always trapped in dead-end marriages and jobs, and they have no friends or family to comfort or confront them. Sometimes they are given lavish homes as if to mock the poverty of their internal lives, but mostly they dwell in holes. I can see them down there sipping at their misery cocktails, wallowing poetically. Characters in holes don't hope or struggle or mourn. They put nothing at risk. But wait a second, you're saying, perhaps defensively, isn't the inability to connect emotionally a central crisis of human consciousness? Didn't Hemingway write about this shit all the time? To which I would respond, yes, and yes, but Hemingway had the good sense to place his alienated heroes in the midst of tumult. And furthermore, to intrude upon their sense of alienation, he made them want things. Heroism, the devotion of unreliable women, large symbolic fish. This is by way of observing that alienation is not a natural human resting state. It's a response to thwarted desire. Your duty as a writer is not to erect lovely monuments to these lesser defense mechanisms, but, on the contrary, to dismantle them and thereby expose the unbearable feelings they conceal. That's your job as a writer. It doesn't have to be over-the-top writing. It can be The Remains of the Day. It can be Mrs. Bridge or Mr. Bridge. It can be Stoner. Novels that are restrained to the point of asphyxiation, but that are absolutely shattering emotionally. All right, time for maybe one more question. Yes, sir?
I had one about the story the donkey.
The donkey one?
Yeah.
Yep. It's got a sequel that involves goat herding. So you
I actually did read that story, and I was just curious on how you, it seems like throughout the entire story you're comparing these two men and they're mirror objects or opposites of each other.
Mm-hmm.
How did you make the decision to kind of give, spoiler alert, give the final win to to Sharp rather than Oz?
Yeah, it's like one of those spoiler alerts. It's like one of the world's least offensive. Like, oh no, you gave away that obscure short story's ending. Darn, I'm not going to go out and buy that book. Well, that's a pretty specific question, but what I'll say is that your job, kind of just stepping back from that, so Oz is the protagonist of that story. He's the person who we're really on board with. You know, readers are asking two questions. Who do I care about, and what do they care about? Those are the two questions they're asking as soon as they pick up any piece of writing, especially a narrative piece of writing. Who do I care about, and what do they care about? And as soon as those questions are answered, the reader just breathes a sigh of relief. And you know what? So does the author. You know that you're actually writing a story. There's a desire. Hopefully there's going to be a good antagonist who will come in and make some trouble in the pursuit of that desire. So Oz, in a sense, is the person who thinks he knows it all. His problem is one of hubris. He thinks he knows things. He thinks he knows more than his patients. He thinks he's the one who treats people. And what he has to discover at the end of the story is that he doesn't know everything. And that Sharp has a certain kind of wisdom that he doesn't have. And he's a donkey. He gets played. It's just more dangerous that way. The reader feels it because the reader's kind of sitting in with Oz going, yeah, oh boy, poor Sharp's going to get it, that fool. And then the reader has to... You're always kind of trying to hold a mirror up to the reader so the reader has to see their own shit. Your job, especially in short fiction, is to implicate the reader. The reader should feel implicated by what you write. They should recognize that they too have done that, felt that, been that person, right? No matter what the setting is. So if people want to take a look at these books, I will have them tonight, but I also am happy. I only sell them in person, so I should say that. And I only sell them for cash, like a drug dealer. So if people want to come up and check those out and do a drug deal, you're welcome to. And otherwise, hopefully I'll see you guys tonight. Thanks.
All right, guys. More Steve Almond tonight at 8 o'clock in the Business Leadership Building, room 0.
graphic material. This is a warning if anybody's troubled by that.